Since the United Nations adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, we have made immense strides in raising awareness about human rights. This affirmation of the fundamental equality and dignity of every human being has been translated into the creation of laws and institutions dedicated to the cause. But the challenge now is in engaging human rights at the individual level. I believe that human rights really starts from each of us. Respecting another person's rights begins from valuing that person and listening to what he or she has to say. So the idea that I'm sharing today is that the voice plays a critical role in affirming and securing human rights. I focus on the role of youth, who are often silenced and ignored, and how they can be empowered through opportunities to express themselves in their education. Since I was little, and I know I'm still little today, I have been concerned about peace. My grandmother survived the atomic bombing of Nagasaki and wished for nobody ever again to experience the kind of pain and horror that she had endured. My parents, who maintain a strong Buddhist faith, have also raised me to value peace. But I think that I always had a vague notion of what peace really was. I thought that peace was the work of diplomats who come and sit together at important meetings and somehow smooth out decades of hate between two warring parties. So when I came to TEDxClaremontColleges, I had hopes of becoming one of these diplomats. During my junior year, I studied abroad in Uganda, a country recovering from over 2 decades of conflict in the north. A brutal rebel group had snatched away tens of thousands of children from their homes and used them as instruments of terror against their own people. Over 1 million people were displaced and squeezed into camps. So during the time of my visit, people were just beginning to return home to pick up the shattered remains of their lives. And even though some level of peace had returned to the region, many still felt resentment toward the South for failing to come to their assistance. And as I spoke to people throughout the North, regardless of their circumstances, I found that everyone's main concern was education. They craved peace and a better future for their society, and they put their hopes in education. So once I saw the realities on the ground, my perspective on conflict resolution began to shift. I realized that lasting peace does not simply result from high-level negotiations between diplomats. And this is because hate and hostility take their root within an individual's heart. Therefore, peace must also sprout and blossom from within. And inner peace within an individual is the building block in the architecture of peace. And education has the powerful potential to sow these seeds of peace and understanding among our youth. I saw 2 kinds of education during my time in Uganda. The first kind of education I saw was in the village setting. When I visited a remote village in the north, I was warmly welcomed by the people there, who promptly slaughtered a chicken in my honor and gave me the best and chewiest part, the gizzard. And after our feasting, the entire family from all generations sat in a big circle around a bonfire, and our class with the elder began. The respected grandfather of the community first began to challenge our wits by asking us riddles. Then he began to weave tales of their ancient ancestors. I didn't realize at that time that I was part of an important educational tradition for the community. For centuries, older generations have transmitted knowledge and wisdom to younger generations to prepare them for a life of contribution in the community. And the Ugandan elder expected me to be a part of it. So after he told a story about how his family had suffered through many wars, he told me that it's my turn. And I felt completely put on the spot. But what came to my mind and what I ended up sharing was my grandmother's experience during World War II. Everybody solemnly nodded as they listened, and we all agreed that war was the most terrible evil. I won't forget the experience I had in the village, nor the people who treated me there as their daughter. But this kind of educational practice is increasingly being displaced by a second form of education. And this kind of education is what we usually think of: schools. In contrast to education in the village, I found that schools in Uganda rarely encourage student expression and creativity. They mostly rely upon a one-way transmission of information from teacher to student. And the nature of the content taught in the schools led students to see themselves through a European lens. They call their country underdeveloped. They even call their hair of low quality. Kenyan environmentalist Wangari Maathai has said, "What is important, indeed necessary, is to hold up your own mirror to see yourself as you really are." So instead of seeing themselves in terms of deficits, the students in Uganda also needed to hold up their own mirrors and recognize the knowledge and experience that they already possessed. So I came back to Claremont, turning questions over in my head. What could I possibly do to contribute in a positive and a respectful way to the people who have opened up their lives to me? And I reflected back on my journey as a student and the turning points toward my growth. When I was in high school, I had very little confidence and I trembled at the thought of giving a presentation. So it's incredible that I'm even standing here today and talking in front of you. But I had one encouraging high school teacher who told me to join the debate team. And although I was hesitant, I did, and with practice, I began to build my confidence in public speaking. In college, I continued to debate, and I met another extraordinary teacher, who some of you may know, John Mino, who was my college debate coach. John, along with Kate Schuster, spearheaded an enormously popular public debate program for middle and high schools. And by training me in how to teach others debate, he taught me that I could share the joy and empowerment of debating with others. So an idea sprang into my head. Why don't I bring this program to Africa? So I pitched the idea for a pilot debate project in Ugandan schools to an African organization called the Forum for African Women Educationalists. They loved the idea, and the summer after my junior year, I was back in Uganda introducing the public debate program for the first time in East Africa. The first school that I visited was in one of the worst performing districts of the country. And like all Ugandan schools, the language of instruction was English. But the very convenient fact was that most of the students did not know English. And so when I talked about the idea to the teachers, they all expressed their doubts. They said, "Our children are children of the villages. They will not be able to do this. They can't even speak English." But they were kind enough to be somewhat encouraging. They said, "Well, you can go ahead and try." And I began to understand their perspective once I stepped into the classroom. It looked something like this. And my buoyant optimism began to deflate as soon as I saw the 100 or so students with their bright faces fixed on me. They were riveted on my different skin, my hair, because I was probably the first non-African with whom they have interacted. But I naively assumed that they were being attentive to my words. So I began to teach away about debate, argumentation, and I thought I was doing a great job. But once I began to ask the students questions, I realized that they didn't understand what I was saying. And I continued to repeat my questions in a more flustered manner over and over again. But the students became more confused, some began to fall asleep, some talked to their friends, and others looked out the window, perhaps waiting for their real teacher to come in and tell them what this poor Asian lady was trying to say. So by the time the class ended, I had gotten through the content, but I had no idea whether I had successfully succeeded in teaching the students what I planned. And I felt frustrated and defeated, but I reflected back upon what I did. Was it really me or the students? Hadn't I taught and explained everything clearly? And it slowly dawned on me that I have an accent. Ugandans pronounce what we will pronounce as ers into ahs. And they also are famous for their lengthy greeting rituals. They like to savor every word and take their time to speak. And they have their own vocabulary. So even if we do speak English, we do not always understand each other. And my American accent and my speedy delivery had made it difficult for the students to understand what I was saying. So I realized that instead of blaming the students, I needed to take full responsibility for their learning and growth, and that I must continually go through the process of self-reflection and inner transformation in order to become a better teacher. And a big part of this was getting to know the students and finding out what sparks their flame of learning. Since I stayed near the school, I had an opportunity to build more rapport with the students. I would have meals with them and experience what it was like to have dry cornmeal and watery beans day after day for lunch and dinner. I found out that in the morning they would wake up very early, attend to family chores, and then walk, sometimes for great distances, to arrive at school. I learned that when they go back home, they may not have electricity or not even oil lamps in their homes, but they would go to a nearby gasoline station and study under that light into the late hours of the night. So despite their difficult circumstances, these children had an insatiable hunger to learn. And they took great interest in debate once I got my act together. Debate was different. It was new for them to be encouraged to take the stage and to think critically about different issues instead of blindly accepting what they heard. So by the end of 3 weeks, the students were able to deliver eloquent speeches to an audience of this many people on the merits and demerits of universal secondary education. The teachers were blown away. The debate had revolutionized their expectations of their students. So all the schools that I visited that summer in Uganda expressed overwhelming enthusiasm for the program. And teachers across the disciplines found debate as a useful tool for student engagement. And I was determined to come back to Claremont and also continue this after my graduation. Luckily, I was able to receive a grant from the Napier Initiative to expand the program in East Africa to Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi. So over 6 months, I traveled throughout those countries and held debate seminars for 300 teachers from 180 schools, extending the reach of the program to thousands of more students. And while I was traveling through each country and working with the youth in the schools, I also encountered non-school going youth who were silenced and ignored by the rest of society. I met young women who were forced into marriage at a young age and had to leave school. I met children who were sold from their villages and forced to beg in the streets. These children were not only invisible, but unheard. Although I didn't have the opportunity to work with these marginalized youth, I deeply felt the importance of self-expression for human rights. And there are 2 reasons for this. The first is that our voices enable us to share our ideas with others. Using our voice is a fundamentally social act. When we speak, we reach out to others. And because of this, students are able to transform expectations of what society thinks of them, using their voices as vehicles toward change. Through the public debate program, the students learned how to think on their own and to express their opinions on issues important to their lives. In our school-hosted public debates, we openly discuss issues ranging from female circumcision, affirmative action, to urbanization. And girls, who are traditionally expected to be obedient and quiet, are defying gender stereotypes and paving the way for female leadership in African society. Second, the coming together of multiple voices through dialogue can lead to the birth of a shared commitment to change. Buddhist educator, my mentor, Daisaku Ikeda, has written that the greatest empowerment is realized when, through dialogue, we advance from a shared awareness and concern about a difficult situation to a shared pledge or vow to achieve its resolution. Therefore, our voices can be used to empower others in order to overcome a common problem. And debate is one way of fostering this kind of dialogue. Even though debate is usually associated with yelling and screaming and antagonism, it can happen under norms of mutual respect. And I found that these norms can be taught and practiced among the students themselves. One group of students whom I worked with in Rwanda deeply inspired me. They had been the shyest students that I met so far. When I tried to greet them, they would murmur and look down. When I asked them to speak in class, some would cover their faces and run away. So they were the shyest students, but by the end of the 3 weeks of training, they had undergone a visible and audible change. In a public debate, they were able to speak with chins up, eyes on the audience, and voices full of conviction. Before I departed from that school, I asked the students a question that was on my mind. do you think that another genocide could happen in Rwanda? And the students resolutely shook their heads. And they told me that they would never allow another genocide in Rwanda. Their words filled me with so much hope and encouraged me that there is a brighter future, that they have a shared commitment for a more peaceful future for their country. And this is the reason why youth need a greater voice in African society, to challenge the world's expectations of Africa. And these lessons do not matter just to Africa. The same violations of human rights and the repression of the voices of young people also happens here in our country. Ultimately, instead of speaking for the disadvantaged, we must empower them to speak for themselves. And for me as an educator, I am determined to continue to encourage youth to express themselves, to listen to them. And as the youth continue their dialogue at home, they will send ripples of transformations across their communities, their countries, and the world. And with each transformation in each individual, I am convinced that we will move toward turning our shared challenges into victories for humanity. Thank you.